Welcome to another episode of Extreme Expat Stories of Thailand. I took a Tuk-Tuk in Bangkok and woke up with nothing. My name is Bo, and I'm about to tell you the most humiliating story of my life. 3 months ago, I was living my dream in Bangkok, or so I thought. Today, I'm back in my cramped studio apartment in Flushing, Queens, wondering how everything went so wrong, so fast. At 37, I was officially a failure, divorced from my white American wife, Rebecca, after she discovered I'd been secretly living off my mother's money for 2 years. No steady job, no prospects, no respect. Rebecca had been my ticket to the American dream. Blonde, educated, Fortune 500 marketing executive. Everything I thought I wanted. For 3 years, I played successful entrepreneur while my mother wired money from Shenzhen to keep up appearances. The divorce was brutal. Rebecca didn't just leave. She exposed everything. The fake business, the family money, all of it. In Chinese, we say, family shame should not be aired outside. Rebecca aired everything. So there I was, single, broke, living where I grew up, working part-time at my uncle's import business. My mother's disappointed calls from China were my only regular human contact. That's when I discovered the digital nomad scene. Late one night on YouTube, I found these channels. Guys living in Thailand and the Philippines, working from beachside cafes, surrounded by beautiful women who seemed genuinely interested in dating them. What caught my attention were the comments. Being Chinese American in Southeast Asia is like being a celebrity. Asian guys clean up in Thailand if they speak English and have money. Finally, somewhere my race doesn't work against me in dating. I found entire forums about Asian American guys who'd found dating success in Southeast Asia. They called it riding the white horse. Finding European and American women traveling through Asia who were more open-minded than back home. The plan crystallized. Spend 6 months in Bangkok using my mother's money, launch an online business, document everything for social media, and return as a successful international entrepreneur. I chose Bangkok over Bali or Canggu because it seemed more sophisticated. Bangkok had cosmopolitan energy, plus cost of living would make my mother's transfers go much down. I found a serviced apartment near Nana BTS station, close to the action and reasonably priced. The building photographed well for Instagram, with easy access to both business districts and nightlife. My routine developed around Sukhumvit cafes, particularly Dean and DeLuca in M Quartier Mall. Perfect aesthetic. Clean, modern, laptop workers everywhere. I'd post photos of my workspace. Cappuccino next to my MacBook. Captions about building my empire from paradise. Reality was messier. Most mornings, answer emails from clients who never materialized, work on a dropshipping store selling overpriced phone accessories, research business opportunities by watching other people's YouTube channels. But the lifestyle felt incredible. $1,500 per month total, less than my old rent, living better than ever. Daily restaurant meals, regular massages, scooter rental that made me feel like I belonged. The social scene was where things got interesting. Bangkok's expat community was as advertised. Entrepreneurs, remote workers, digital nomads from everywhere. More importantly, Western women traveling solo or working remotely. Exactly who I'd struggled with back home. And it was working. First month, coffee with Emma, a Danish writer. Drinks with Sarah, a German marketing consultant. Dinner with Jennifer, American travel blogger, who seemed impressed by my business ventures. Nothing progressed beyond casual dating, but these interactions felt revolutionary. These women actually seemed interested in my perspective, treated me like someone worth knowing rather than just a safe Asian friend. I started believing my own hype. Maybe I really was more attractive to international women. Maybe my background and ambitions were assets in Bangkok's scene. I documented everything on social media. Mobile office photos, networking event stories, carefully curated images suggesting laptop lifestyle success. The comments were encouraging. Guys asking for advice, dating prospects intrigued by my Bangkok adventures, potential business inquiries about my expertise in Southeast Asian markets. 3 months into my Bangkok experiment, I was feeling invincible. I'd just finished a video call with a potential client, who ultimately ghosted, but I didn't know that yet. And I decided to celebrate at Above 11, this trendy Peruvian restaurant with incredible city views. The plan was simple. Nice dinner, maybe a drink at one of the rooftop bars afterward, then home to edit some content for my YouTube channel about the real digital nomad lifestyle in Bangkok. Dinner was perfect. Excellent pisco sours, amazing ceviches, and I even struck up a conversation with a couple at the next table. Australians working in renewable energy who were fascinated by my consulting business, and full of questions about what it was like to be an American entrepreneur in Thailand. After dinner, they invited me to continue the conversation at Cloud 47, this upscale lounge on the 47th floor of a nearby hotel. The group expanded. Their friends included a Swiss woman working for the United Nations, a British banker, and 2 Thai women in luxury hospitality marketing. This was exactly the kind of international networking I'd envisioned when I'd planned my Bangkok move. The conversation flowed effortlessly between business, travel, and cultural observations. I found myself holding court about cross-cultural marketing strategies, drawing on my experience working with helping American companies enter Asian markets. One of the Thai women, Nim, seemed particularly interested in my perspective on Western perceptions of Southeast Asian business culture. We ended up in an extended discussion about cultural stereotypes and how international companies navigate local customs. I felt like I was finally accessing the sophisticated, worldly version of myself I had always believed existed. The evening was going perfectly, until it wasn't. By midnight, the Australians were heading out, and the group began dispersing. I'd had several drinks, but felt in complete control. This was the kind of alcohol tolerance I'd built up over years of networking events and business dinners. Nim suggested we continue talking over coffee at a 24-hour place she knew, but I declined. Despite how well the evening was going, I'd learned to be cautious about late-night invitations from people I'd just met, especially after a few drinks. Instead, I decided to head home. Maybe grab a nightcap at one of the hotel bars near my apartment, then work on editing the photos from dinner for my Instagram story. Outside the building, Sukhumvit Road hummed with typical Bangkok nightlife energy. I could have called a grab, but something about the warm night air and the sense of adventure made me nostalgic for my first week in Bangkok, when everything felt new and exciting. That's when I saw the tuk-tuk. The driver was parked under a street light, scrolling through his phone. Middle-aged guy with a friendly face. Exactly the kind of authentic local interaction I'd been craving lately. After 3 months of air-conditioned taxis and app-based transportation, the three-wheeled vehicle seemed like the perfect way to cap off a perfect evening. "Where you go?" he asked as I approached. "Nana," I replied, naming the BTS station near my apartment. "You know the M Quartier Mall?" He nodded enthusiastically. Yes, I know. Very good area. You working there?" "I live nearby," I said, climbing into the back seat. "I'm an entrepreneur. Import-export business." The lie came easily after months of practice. The driver seemed impressed, asking follow-up questions about my work as we pulled into traffic. I found myself enjoying the conversation, explaining my business ventures and my plans to expand throughout Southeast Asia. "You very successful man," he said, glancing back at me through his mirror. "American businessman in Thailand. Very smart. You like Thai girls?" I laughed, relaxed enough by the drinks and the evening's social success to engage with what seemed like harmless conversation. "Thai women are beautiful," I replied, "but I'm mostly here for business." "Ah, business," he grinned. "Bangkok very good for business. Very good for everything. You want to see real Thai culture, not tourist places?" Something in his tone should have made me more alert, but I was feeling too good about the evening to pick up on subtleties. We were making good time through the traffic, and I could see familiar landmarks ahead. That's when he pulled over at a 7-Eleven. "Very sorry," he said, jumping out. "Need cigarettes. Very quick." I waited in the back seat, checking my phone and reviewing the photos from dinner. The Australian couple had already tagged me in their Instagram stories, and I was getting likes and comments from people impressed by my Bangkok lifestyle. The driver returned with a bottle of water, offering it to me with a smile. "Very hot tonight," he said. "You drink. Stay cool." I was thirsty from the alcohol and the warm night air, so I accepted gratefully. The water tasted slightly mineral heavy, maybe a different brand than I usually buy, but I drank about half the bottle as we resumed the journey. That's where my memory starts getting fuzzy. I remember feeling suddenly inexplicably exhausted. The kind of bone-deep tiredness that doesn't match anything you've actually done. I remember the lights outside starting to blur and streak in ways that didn't correspond to our movement through traffic. I remember trying to ask the driver something about our route, but my words came out wrong, slurred and confused, like I was much drunker than I actually was. The last clear image I have is looking up at the streetlights that seemed impossibly bright, pulsing geometric patterns that made no sense given the simple fluorescent bulbs I should have been seeing. Then, nothing. I came to consciousness on a mattress that smelled like industrial bleach and cigarette smoke. The room was tiny and windowless, lit by a single fluorescent tube that flickered every few seconds. Institutional green walls, the kind of color chosen specifically because it hides dirt and wear. I was lying on a thin mattress on a concrete floor, covered by a sheet that felt like sandpaper. My head felt like it was splitting open, But underneath the familiar ache of a hangover was something else. A disorienting fog that made it hard to focus or remember where I was supposed to be. When I tried to sit up, waves of nausea nearly knocked me back down. That's when I started taking inventory. Phone, gone. Wallet, gone. The small laptop bag I'd been carrying, gone. I was still wearing my clothes from dinner. The designer linen shirt and dark jeans I'd bought specifically for Bangkok networking events. But my feet were bare. No shoes, no socks. Even my Apple Watch, a gift from my ex-wife that I'd worn daily for 3 years, had vanished. I stood unsteadily and examined the room more carefully. Besides the mattress, the only furniture was a plastic chair and a small table covered in water stains. The door wasn't locked, but when I opened it, I found myself in a narrow hallway that led to what appeared to be a shared bathroom and a staircase heading down. The smell hit me immediately. Industrial disinfectant mixed with cooking oil and something else I couldn't identify. This wasn't a backpacker hostel or even a budget hotel. This felt like the kind of place people stayed when they had absolutely no other options. I made my way downstairs, each step sending spikes of pain through my skull. The ground floor was a minimal lobby with a reception desk behind metal security grating. A middle-aged Thai woman was mopping the floor, and when she looked up at me, her expression was unforgettable. Part curiosity, part pity, part annoyance, like I was a stray animal that someone else would have to deal with. "Excuse me," I said, my voice coming out rougher than expected. "Where am I?" She responded in rapid Thai, shaking her head when I repeated the question in English. I looked around the lobby for clues. Near the entrance, I spotted a small sign with Thai text and underneath in English, Khlong Toei Guest House. Khlong Toei? The name was vaguely familiar from my research about Bangkok neighborhoods, but not somewhere I'd ever visited or planned to visit. I knew it was a district somewhere in the city, but I couldn't place it geographically relative to anywhere I actually knew. The woman with the mop had moved to a corner but kept glancing at me nervously. I tried gesturing toward the door, saying Nana and M Quartier, hoping she'd recognize landmarks near my apartment. Her response was another stream of apologetic-sounding Thai that didn't help at all. Finally, I decided to venture outside and try to orient myself. The street beyond the guest house looked nothing like the Bangkok I'd been living in for 3 months. Instead of the modern high-rises and manicured sidewalks of Sukhumvit, I was surrounded by low-rise concrete buildings, narrow alleys, and improvised vendor stalls. The air carried different smells too. Fish sauce and motor oil instead of the coffee and air conditioning I'd grown accustomed to. A few people were on the streets despite the early hour, mostly workers heading to what looked like factory or port jobs. I approached a man on a motorcycle, trying to ask directions to Nana in my extremely limited Thai. But he shook his head and drove off. That's when the full scope of my situation started sinking in. I was stranded in an unfamiliar part of Bangkok, with no identification, no money, no phone, and only fragmented memories of how I'd gotten there. The last clear recollection I had was accepting water from a tuk-tuk driver who'd seemed friendly and harmless. The realization hit me like ice water. I'd been drugged and robbed. As someone who'd crafted my image as a savvy international entrepreneur, I was painfully aware of how perfectly I'd embodied every naive tourist cliché. the overconfident foreigner who thought his passport made him immune to street-level crime. I spent 2 hours walking around Khlong Toei, trying to find transportation back to familiar territory. The district felt like a different city, industrial instead of commercial, working class instead of cosmopolitan. Eventually, I flagged down a taxi. When I explained my situation, robbed, no money, needed help, the driver initially refused. After desperate negotiation and promising to pay once I reached my apartment, he agreed to drive me to the Chinese consulate. Even there, my lack of documentation complicated everything. Without my passport, I couldn't prove identity or citizenship. The consular official listened with professional sympathy, but explained replacing documents would take days, requiring police reports and fees I couldn't pay. She let me use their phone. My first call was to my mother in Shenzhen. Getting through took forever, and when I connected, I had to explain in Mandarin why her successful entrepreneur son was calling from a consulate because he'd been robbed. The conversation was excruciating. My mother's disappointment wasn't anger. It was resigned sadness from having worst expectations confirmed again. "Bo," she said finally, "how much money do you need?" The police station was its own humiliation. The officer spoke limited English, and I explained what happened through a bored translator who'd clearly seen this before. Yes, foreign men get drugged and robbed regularly. Yes, it usually happened after drinking when they accepted unofficial rides. No, they rarely recovered property or identified perpetrators. "You lucky," the officer said. "Usually they take everything. Sometimes hurt people who wake up too early." The casual delivery was more disturbing than the crime itself. This wasn't unusual. It was predictable behavior they witnessed weekly from visitors who thought they understood Bangkok. I learned Khlong Toei was home to Bangkok's largest port and most impoverished communities. Not somewhere tourists accidentally ended up, where they got dumped after being robbed because it was far from police stations and embassies, unfamiliar enough to disorient victims. I'd been deposited like garbage. Over the next week, while waiting for replacement documents, I had plenty of time to reflect on how completely my Bangkok fantasy had collapsed. My mother wired money for a decent hotel and basic expenses. But those first hours, waking up disoriented, unable to communicate or navigate, had shattered something fundamental about how I saw myself. I lost my laptop with months of work, though most had been elaborate procrastination disguised as business development. My phone contained local contacts, lifestyle photos, and apps that made navigation effortless. More fundamentally, I'd lost the narrative I'd constructed. I'd imagined myself as a sophisticated international entrepreneur who could navigate Bangkok's complexity with intelligence. Reality: I'd been as vulnerable as any clueless tourist, maybe more so because overconfidence made me careless. The friends I'd made were sympathetic but unsurprised. Emma mentioned hearing similar stories from other solo male travelers. Sarah admitted she'd been warned about accepting drinks or rides from strangers. Bangkok can be incredible, Sarah told me over coffee. But it's still a developing world city with serious inequality. You can't assume speaking English and having money makes you safe. She was right. But her words highlighted something uncomfortable about my entire approach. I'd come partly assuming my Western passport and education would give me advantages I couldn't access in New York. I'd imagined disparities would work in my favor, making me more attractive, more interesting, more capable of living a lifestyle that seemed impossible back home. But those same disparities I'd hoped to exploit created conditions that made me a target. The tuk-tuk driver probably identified me as a wealthy foreigner within minutes. My casual attitude towards inflated fares, willingness to discuss business ventures, obvious unfamiliarity with geography, all marked me as worth robbing. My mother never directly criticized my Bangkok disaster, but monthly support came with new conditions. Regular job search check-ins, expectations I'd take Mandarin classes for real Chinese business opportunities, gentle suggestions about more traditional career paths. Looking back, my Bangkok experiment was doomed because it was built on flawed premises. I'd assumed qualities that made dating difficult in New York would become advantages in Southeast Asia. But I'd misunderstood the dynamics. Western women I'd met weren't more interested because I was Chinese American. They were temporarily open to conversation because we were all displaced travelers seeking social connections. I'd confused artificial intimacy of expat circles with genuine romantic interest. Women who seemed impressed by my business ventures were just being polite to someone they might never see again. Most fundamentally, I'd treated Thailand like a video game designed for my entertainment, where Western passport and modest resources would unlock experiences unavailable at home. I never seriously considered I was entering a complex society where others were solving their own problems, some involving separating naive foreigners from money. The tuk-tuk driver wasn't a villain in my adventure story. Probably someone with bills and family who'd figured out robbing drunk foreigners was more profitable than driving them home safely for small tips. These days, when I see guys posting about plans to escape the West and find success in Southeast Asia, I want to warn them about the gap between Instagram reality and actual experience. The digital nomad lifestyle looks incredible when documented for social media. But day-to-day reality is often lonely, superficial, and more expensive once you factor in hidden costs of constantly adapting to new environments. Dating opportunities that seem promising from distance often turn out based on temporary circumstances and cultural misunderstandings that make them unsustainable long-term. I don't entirely regret Bangkok, but I regret the assumptions I brought. I'd approached Thailand like a consumer problem I could solve through research and cultural sensitivity, when I should have approached it like any major city where I was a visible outsider with limited local knowledge and obvious vulnerabilities. Bangkok taught me the world isn't organized around making Western men feel successful and desired, despite what YouTube suggests. It's where everyone's trying to survive, and sometimes survival strategies conflict directly with vacation fantasies. That tuk-tuk ride costs more than money and possessions. It costs the comfortable delusion that I could escape problems by changing location, and that being educated and internationally minded would make me immune to mistakes other tourists make daily. But maybe that lesson was worth learning, even if it took waking up barefoot in Khlong Toei to understand it. Vulnerable to the most cliched form of tourist victimization imaginable. The real Thailand I'd encountered wasn't the sophisticated cosmopolitan culture I'd admired in Bangkok's international districts. It was the economic desperation that made drugging and robbing foreigners a survival strategy. I returned to New York 6 months earlier than planned. The official story I posted on social media was about pivoting to focus on family business opportunities that required my presence in the States. The reality was that I'd lost confidence in my abilities to navigate unfamiliar environments, and I'd grown tired of the person I'd become in Bangkok. Someone who'd confused financial privilege with wisdom and wanderlust with actual life experience. Back in Flushing, Queens, my life returned to depressingly familiar patterns. The same cramped studio apartment, the same part-time work at my uncle's import business, the same disappointing dating apps full of women who seemed completely unimpressed by my brief stint as an international entrepreneur. Looking back now, I understand that my Bangkok experiment was doomed from the start because it was built on fundamentally flawed premises. I'd assumed the same qualities that made dating difficult in New York, being an educated Asian American guy without obvious wealth or status, would somehow become advantageous in Southeast Asia. But I'd completely misunderstood the dynamics involved. The Western women I'd met in Bangkok weren't more interested in me because I was Chinese American. They were temporarily more open to conversation because we were all displaced travelers looking for social connections in an unfamiliar environment. I'd confused the artificial intimacy of expat social circles with genuine romantic interest. The women who'd seemed impressed by my business ventures were just being polite to someone they would never see again. The cultural conversations I'd thought were so meaningful were probably just ways to pass time over coffee before moving on to their next destination. The tuk-tuk driver who robbed me wasn't a villain in my personal adventure story. He was probably someone with bills to pay and family to support, who'd figured out that drugging drunk foreigners was more profitable than driving them home safely for small tips. My victimization wasn't random bad luck. It was the predictable result of behavior patterns he'd learned to recognize and exploit. And the authentic experiences you think you're having as a budget-conscious traveler are usually just different versions of the tourist economy, designed to separate you from your money while making you feel special and worldly. The sophistication I thought I possessed was really just elaborate naivety, the belief that being well-traveled was the same as being street-smart, and that having good intentions would protect me from people who'd learn to profit from these intentions. The tuk-tuk ride cost me more than just money and possessions. It cost me the comfortable delusion that I could escape my problems by changing my location, and that being an educated, internationally minded person would make me immune to the same mistakes that other tourists make every day. But maybe that was a lesson worth learning, even if it took waking up barefoot in Khlong Toei to finally understand it.